The Aburrá Valley is a subregion comprising 10 municipalities in the Department of Antioquia, Colombia. Despite its rapid urban expansion, is home to many species of wildlife. Among them we can find the macaws, parrots and parakeets that have come to this territory for multiple reasons. Migration, releases, and because some of these individuals have escaped from the sites where they are kept in captivity. In the case of psittacids, the first records of the evolution of the group date back more or less 45,000 years, where the first populations present in South America are referenced. These birds have somehow served all human peoples as a source of food, as pets, and have been highly prized for their feathers, which are used in headdresses, magic religious ceremonies that have to do with these ethnic groups. These animals are part of the ecosystem of the cities, and efforts must be made and actions must be taken by the environmental authorities for their conservation and the care of their habitat. Psittacoidea is a species or a family of the group of birds that is characterized mainly by having a strong, thick, curved beak that is one of the main tools with which it develops all its activities. How to extract food, explore, make nests, is one of the tools they use most. Also have a particularity in the fingers that are zygodactyl, which have 2 front and 2 back, which helps them to be positioned on the branches of trees and give them greater stability. Psittacids are a family of birds that are characterized by having a strong and curved beak, robust body, and plumage with bright colors. This can be of a single color or a combination of several depending on the species. They are monogamous, which means that they form couples for life, and a very special feature is that they are long-lived animals, so they can live more than 40 years. The first records we have of parrots in Europe was when Christopher Columbus, for the year 1493, took as part of the gifts to the kings of Spain, took parrots. So they were called at that time. They are also known by that name, macaws, Gonzalo, or parrots. The first records we have was a group of 30 individuals who came to Spain. They were important at that time and trade increased, for all the connotations that we have said, for their beauty, for their adaptability with the human being. Because somehow they learn to consume different fruits, because they are not with very specialized diets, they adapt very well to other environments, besides being very long-lived animals, somehow that help to have them more easily in captivity. They are also characterized by being family groups and form mixed flocks between congeners, let's say, cousins of their own species. This is one of the most particular groups we have in the Aburrá Valley and in Colombia in general. Another peculiarity of parrots is that they are monogamous, that is to say that the partner they get in their reproductive state or age, is the one they will have for life. There are data in captivity that when couples die, those who are alive also tend to die, due to the fact that they can no longer get a new partner. They are also characterized for being very long-lived. There are estimates that in captivity they can live from 10 to 15 years, but in the wild they can live up to 50 years. The establishment of these species in the city has some disadvantages for them. First, that in the city there are no trees or palms where they can find their nests, nor their traditional food sources. But you have already told me that they can adapt to other different sources, and clean water is very important for them. Now there are some advantages that have helped the proliferation of these groups in the city, and that is that there are no natural predators that can affect them. Nor are there much what we call the plundering of nests, which if they occur in natural conditions, where people go to plunder the nests, eggs, chicks, and if they take them, in the city it is rare that, by the control often also of the authorities and the same citizens who make a citizen control against that fact. In the valley of Aburrá we have about 3 species of macaws that are the most characteristic. We have the flag macaw, which is the one that we see red with yellow and blue bands, that is why we call it flag. We have the Gonzalo macaw, which is a particularity that is blue with yellow, and we have the completely green carica, with a characteristic that the face is naked of feather, that is why it is called carica. Each one of these has a similarity of the group of the psittacids, that is that they are very united family groups and that they have a very specific parental care when they have their units or their young. People often ask us or wonder why there is so much diversity in this group of psittacids. How did they come to settle in the city? Why do we see them regularly in urban parks? First of all, they escaped because they were in cages. They escaped, they went out into the environment. Another reason was that they were animals in semi-captivity, and to say that they are in a plot of land or on a farm, their feathers are trimmed and the animals are somehow in a degree of taming. But they were related to their congeners and did not return, and they escaped and did not come back. Another point was the releases that the owners themselves did because they were bored with them. Animals, or they were sorry to have them in cages, so they released them. The releases that the environmental authorities have also done at the urban level. Also the releases that the traffickers did not to be discovered. These are the factors. All these factors make that the cities, as in the case of Medellin, have so many parrots, macaws and parakeets free. As for the number of macaws in the whole city, we have an estimate of around 50. Why? Because there is no study or rigorous knowledge of how they are arriving, how they are entering the city, and how they are reproducing. There is no particularity of the species of the Aburrá macaw, which is already considered an established species in the territory, because we are already showing that they have nesting processes, and the process is to take the chicks and make the whole process of new generations within the valley. We also have some records that because of external events on the outskirts of the city, species have managed to migrate along the water sources. Let's call it at this time the Medellin River, or the Parrots River, that moves along the northeast of the department, have begun to climb the Parrots River and have managed to settle in the city. Some species such as aramilidas and other species of parakeets, such as the genus Forpus or Protogerus. This is a very important case study, because there are cities around the world such as London, Hong Kong and Barcelona. However, in some cities that are those species that we find in abundance of parrots are species that have been reintroduced and do not belong to their natural fauna. As is the case here in Medellin, since all species that are released, except 3 species, are species that are native. We have some unwanted releases, for example the case of Agapornis or Fisher's parakeets, which have escaped, and sometimes we see them in small groups, nymph cockatoos and Australian parakeets, 3 groups of psittacids that are not native to the national territory. But nevertheless there are some populations already at the natural level. One of the most particular places to see macaws, let's say in their daily activities, is all the green areas that we have in the area of the town. an area that has managed to preserve all that green space and the possibility of resources that they need to be able to stay in time in the valley. There are also areas such as the Botanical Garden, some areas north of the city that also have some very isolated groups, which are constantly passing through. Once these species are in the wild, their adaptation is very simple, because they are very sociable species, and that is why we like psittacids, because they are very sociable. They have the possibility of forming mixed flocks. What do we mean by mixed flocks? With other groups of congeners that can be of the same group, that is to say with other psittacids. For example, we can find macaws living with parrots, parrots living with parakeets, or parakeets living with parakeets, but also in places that have been released, for example. Secondly, because of this great capacity of adaptation they have, they get used to eat different diets. They learn to consume fruits that normally are not in their natural distribution areas but that they will find in them. Cities that also, for example, the city of Medellin favors that, because it is a natural tropical system, we will find fruits almost all year round in many species, so it helps to favor the presence of these species. The diet of these macaws is basically based on fleshy fruits, buds of some trees that have been able to adapt to their diet, not being the usual, and almost always we see them move in the mornings and return in the afternoons to the nesting sites. Basically, it is a very natural behavior in all psittacids. These groups of birds that are not native to the Aburrá Valley are already part of this ecosystem, which is why it is important that in the planting plans that are projected for forest recovery or ornamentation of residential units, professionals from various areas such as biology are included to obtain a better food supply for these species. Also, in Envigado we have that particularity that they are arriving to some units very punctually, because of the availability of food or just to feed, to rest from the day's flight, and on the other hand, also, the proximity to man. Why the proximity to man? Because we use feedlots, a very notable practice in the city, and that is not good and is not desirable. Why? Because the species become somehow lazy. Lazy in what way? In the sense that they do not look for their own food, but depend on a resource that is somehow inexhaustible, because it will always be supplied. That is not good, because the populations must somehow be natural and consume what is in their natural environment. Many people do not know this and possibly feed them with things that are not natural, when they have psittacids in captivity. I have heard that they even give them chocolate with bread or wine so that they tune their voices. An animal in those conditions of captivity will never be able to obtain those resources in the wild, and therefore, if it is good for them, it is bad for them because it can bring problems at a metabolic level and bring problems, let's say, cardiac problems, because in many cases they consume food with salt. Brother Marco Antonio Serna, who is a brother of La Salle, in his records for the year for the beginning of the century concluded that in the city of Medellin there were about 21 species. Of those 21 species, 16 species are native. Of those 21, 2 species were not recorded again in the Aburrá Valley and are considered locally extinct. As the parrot of the 7 colors and the parakeet baritetta are no longer found here and have not been recorded at the metropolitan area level. There are other species that have established themselves very well, and there are 6 species that have really managed to visualize themselves and can survive very well in the city, such as the scarlet macaw, the chaja, the yellow-fronted parrot, the Amazonian parrot, the royal parrot, the parakeet, the yellow-fronted parakeet, the red-fronted parakeet and the red-fronted parakeet. These are the royal parrot, the spectacled parakeet, the tan parakeet and the dirty-faced parrots. We have been able to record births and monitoring of nests of the royal parrot and the Aburrá macaw, which is the most colorful of the whole group. Within the group of psittacids that we have in the valley, we have a group that are the parrots or the Amazon genus, that are also characterized by being a little smaller than the macaws of robust bodies and form mixed groups, or let's say they form as groups of several species to go in search of food, in search of shelter and nesting sites. They are also characterized by generating a dispersion of seeds throughout the metropolitan area that helps us, and we are going to regenerate urban areas that also gives us the facility to continue building more continuous and better preserved green areas. Psittacids in general make family groups, that is to say that there are several pairs or several families that make up a flock. In general, in parrots it is more for a protection issue and to have a much greater variability among themselves, basically as that particularity that occurs so that the groups are a little larger. The city is an artificial system. It is a system that is artificially constructed and we demolish it to build other different things. In those constructive processes many times it is necessary to take advantage of forests, and people made a planning of the artistic and the beauty of a recreated landscape many times. In many cases the stumps of the palms that remain or the steps that are left and the palm dies are removed because ornamentally they are not beautiful, but the usefulness of these steps of the palms for the breeding of parrots, parakeets and macaws is very interesting. Also, as we are focused on the establishment of these new species, we have the most ideal and what would be most functional for all this establishment would be that in the design and implementation of these plantings there is an accompaniment of both a forestry component and a component of biology, because what we want is to offer or increase the food supply of all species. It is like evaluating and analyzing what species we have in the territory and what species we want to bring new ones to it. Increasing that tropical supply obviously with the availability of trees and shrubs in many areas where they can generate or find a new ecosystem from which they can take advantage of. The environmental authority has somehow made a limitation in those felling and in some way has even made that some individuals are transplanted, in order to favor the breeding of these species. It is like here for example in El Poblado, in Robledo, in Envigado we can observe in many urbanizations the care of those steps, of those stumps that are left of the palms. Another particularity would be the placement of breeding boxes in controlled environments and in natural environments, so that these animals that can no longer find large trees in the city, can obtain their nests in appropriate shelters to be able to have the reproduction processes. One of the groups that I find most interesting are the parakeets. Here in the area or in the city we have two species which are the spectacled parakeet and the tan parakeet. They are particularly the species that have suffered or have had a much greater pressure due to the traffic of species. This leads them to move and leave their natural areas to keep them in houses as pets in many ways, and they are one of the species that have been able to adapt better to urban environments, that have been able to take advantage of both the availability of food and nesting sites. It is also very important to consider that in the valley or in the city we also have to have the availability of palms, since we want to generate new environments for these species. It is also important to take them into account because these are nesting sites. Let's say from the natural history of many of these species, and the food is also focused on those fruits that they can provide. In addition to the efforts that can be made from the environmental authorities and builders in the Aburrá Valley, it is important that people become aware of the presence of wildlife in our environments, about the illegal trafficking of species, the care and respect for these fundamental actors for the balance of our ecosystem, as they fulfill important functions such as seed dispersers among others. The objective is to conserve the species that are not native to our territory, but have arrived and have established themselves. The estimates range from being able to adapt to new food availability with the trees that are being planted, with the new tree regeneration that is being generated, from the compensation of many projects and also the nesting areas that are being found in order to establish themselves and be able to bring out new generations of their own communities or species. The call to people is to take care that we do not have wild pets in captivity. It is really not desirable, it is neither good nor desirable. We are in a wave now that everyone wants to be more sustainable, more ecological, to have cities with resilience. What these birds show us in resilience, although they were trafficked and were mistreated and many of their congeners died, they managed to adapt in an urban environment that sometimes is complicated. There are activities that can be done along this group of species, such as contemplation or direct observation of the group of birds throughout the metropolitan area. It is also to see how these processes of urbanization have somehow made many species stabilize and see the environment in very disturbed environments, as is the case of the parrots in the eastern mania in the city of Medellin, where a group of species managed to survive, being this a group that is not native to the city, although some individuals arrived from the Magdalena Medio to here, because of the connotations of climate change, that the climate is changing. The species have somehow sought other sites, and it is to see how these species have adapted well in their urban environments. Nobody bothers them, nobody has to do with them, and they are somehow beautifying a space that everyone passes through and that somehow will become a reference in the city as an observation site and possibly a tourist site. The invitation is that we take care and conserve these species that we have in the valley, because they are of utmost importance. They provide us with very important fundamental services such as seed dispersal, and also that we do not feed them, we do not generate an alteration to their physiological state, because they have a specific diet and that is what they feed on. The only thing that is being asked in some way is that people become aware that this is species trafficking, and that removing a species from its natural environment has important ecological implications, since it stops providing many ecosystem or environmental services that people call, which I would rather call essential services, because water and air are essential for the life of human beings. In this case, for example, psittacids are excellent seed dispersers. In some way they also control outbreaks of some species bloom so that they do not produce so many seeds, which are not desirable. In short, the quantity, and not only that but the beautification of the forest, because only the purpose of having a living species to be able to observe it and take care of it guarantees us in some way the environmental sustainability that we all want to have someday.